Hello, guys, and welcome to my Week 11 predictions video and thoughts. And I'm going to do this the same format where I am going from what I think is the least relevant games all the way up to what I think is the matchup of the week. So, with that being said, let me start the analysis. The first game we will be looking at is Browns Saints. Obviously, Jameis Winston returning to New Orleans, where he's been on the team the last 4 years as a backup, seeing limited playing time, and, essentially, them wanting to kind of the same sort of situation where the Saints at times wanted him plugged in alongside the Browns, where he is now obviously forced in the starting role after Deshaun Watson's injury. This game to me just doesn't hold any relevance because unless one of these teams wins out, it doesn't even look like they're going to make the playoffs, type of thing. Like they're too far gone. Obviously, in the next couple of weeks, these two teams could potentially be eliminated. If the Browns win here, they're both still really close to being eliminated. But if the Saints win, then there's the probability that they do so. The Browns, I think, even though they're only given a 1 point advantage in this game, I'm going to say I think that they win this game just because of the fact that their defense is better than the Saints. Now, the Saints, even since trading Lattimore, they still performed very well. And since obviously firing their head coach, they still perform very well, beating the Falcons last week, albeit the Falcons kind of just threw away that game. I think, 9 times out of 10, you have a Falcons victory and, that sort of thing. The Browns, they look kind of good when Jameis Winston came in, and now they've really simmered down because the lack of talent on that team is very, very apparent. I am, however, going to go with the Browns. I think that their defense is just going to ultimately be a little bit more disruptive. It might be a little knock on wood type of thing. I don't know why the Saints, I guess, are the probability by the ESPN analytics is the same. For whatever reason they don't say 50-50, but they say 49.8, which I think is hilarious for each team. But like, it's kind of one of those games where it's like, who really cares who wins? I am going to pick the Browns because for whatever reason, I feel like the Saints got really lucky last week and they're not going to get that this week. Moving on, we have Colts Jets. Obviously, the return of Anthony Richardson, the second youngest QB in the NFL, up against the oldest and Aaron Rodgers. They favor the Jets in this one, but I'll be real with you guys. Even though it's in New Jersey, even though the Jets clearly need this win after we thought, oh, they beat the Texans, maybe they're igniting this team, and they sucked last week. They sucked. And I literally said, I am done believing in the Jets. I just don't trust. Their defense has gotten worse with obviously a good amount of talent. The Colts, I think, are kind of a sort of developing diamond in the rough, so to speak, where they still have untapped potential. We kind of know what the Jets are, and it's ridiculous. I mean, they've just obviously very much underperformed. And it's not like they've had any like crazy major injuries on the Jets, and they even added talent with Adams. And it's just bizarre. I am going to take the Colts for the sole reason that I think Jonathan Taylor can have a huge game and he can really quiet the crowd with the Jets, and the Jets have sucked against the run. Now, I don't know what to expect from Anthony Richardson. He could very likely throw the game away potentially. But I do think that he's at least going to try and, push the ball downfield, unlike Flacco did. And I feel like Flacco just kind of flatlined very quickly when he had the starting job. But I am going to go with the Colts, which is apparently an upset, and that they're giving the Jets a 61% chance to win. And, they gave them a 4-point advantage, but I'm going with the Colts. I think the Colts, I don't think this is like that big of a huge upset in my eyes. I think that they're going to be able to do things against the Jets, and they have a very good interior. So it's going to have to be the outside of the Jets, doing a lot against the Colts, but the Colts love running inside. And I just do not like what I have seen from the Jets defense on inside runs, which is ridiculous when you're talking about guys like Quinnen Williams and Kinlaw, being in there. That should be able to, stuff and smother the run, as well as their linebacker core. But I'm going with the Colts for an apparent upset in New Jersey. The next game we have is Raiders-Dolphins. The only reason I kind of gave this a little bit more of a relevancy take is because the Dolphins have clearly, they've played a lot better since Tua has gone back. They just have ended up on the wrong side of the score differential type of thing. But last week, they did really, really well against the Rams, a team that I fully expected to beat them, but their defense finally was playing like good defense. And I mean, there's no doubt in my mind that Miami wins this game. The Raiders' lack of talent type of thing, and just the fact that the Dolphins came up against, a way better offense and limited them down. Unless they take a huge step back, I just don't see them losing this game. I'm going with the Dolphins. Rams, Patriots, like I just mentioned, the Rams losing, I wouldn't say unceremoniously, but they had to kick a field goal and do an onside, to try to do 8 points to come back against the Dolphins. But bizarre game. They just looked like they were way too cute against the Dolphins, and the Dolphins just were like, yeah, we're not falling for this, and Stafford tried to, I don't know, play well, but he just wasn't throwing it as well as, I would expect him to. Just kind of an off game. But they visit New England. New England, I would say that they have a little bit of relevancy because Drake May actually is playing well. And he's, given this team some life, and he's showing that he can be the guy with the limited talent of this team. But I'm going to go with the Rams. I don't expect them to have 2 games in a row where Stafford's off and they just essentially don't score, and they have to rely on their kicker for like all of their points. Moving on, we have Vikings, Titans. I put this higher because obviously the Vikings are, still competing for kind of a higher spot, but I can't put them really that much higher for teams that are obviously playoff teams just because they're playing the Titans. Now, the Vikings, last week playing a ridiculously doozy of a game where it's like you're glad to get the win because Darnold throws however many picks, and it's like it's not till the end that you actually take a lead. And then you're just lucky that you're not playing like Trevor Lawrence because Mac Jones just threw like, unforced errors that were terrible. And I mean, obviously it showed that he hadn't played for almost a year, but yeah, it was ridiculous. The Vikings barely win in that game. They lose that game against most teams, I feel like, the way that they played. But they're going up against Tennessee. Tennessee clearly struggling. I do like what Will Levis has been doing with Calvin Ridley. The defense, I think, is still, pretty good. So it's like Darnold's not going to be able to, he's going to have to improve this week. But there's still going to be potential for picks, against the Tennessee Titans because they do have a decent defense that just isn't, complemented by an offense that can do that much, I guess. So looking at this game, we're taking the Vikings, and, Darnold really does have to clean up his play because if he's playing like that close to the postseason, it could be a one and done, in the first round. Texans, Cowboys. I put this a little bit higher because the Texans and the Cowboys, well, the Cowboys clearly are, who the heck knows what's going on with them. I think that this, for being the Monday night game, I think it's kind of interesting. They obviously clearly wanted to have like a Texas showdown. And if this had been last year's teams, it would have been definitely an interesting game where, we might be favoring the Cowboys. But this year, the Texans, obviously, they couldn't close the game against the Lions. I think that they essentially beat themselves because they didn't have second half points. And a lot of people, are giving, the Lions a ton of props. And they... Sorry about that. But yeah, with Texans, Cowboys, the Texans, obviously, a pretty healthy team. I think Nico Collins is supposed to come back for this game. And looking at this, the Cowboys still have a shot to make the postseason potentially, with only 6 losses. But they need to start winning now. And who the heck knows what they can do with Cooper Rush or if it's Trey Lance. I'm not even going to bother checking. I think that the Texans just overall have a better team and have a lot more to play for than, the Cowboys, proving that they are like Texas's team, which is interesting. And it's in prime time. And I just don't think you're going to be able to win a game where you have to be pass heavy against the Texans because they have very opportunistic guys. Moving on, we have Jaguars Lions. I put this game high just because the Lions do have the number 1 seed, for the NFC. Obviously, Jacksonville, losing a game here, which is more than likely, they're not going to be able to be, above 500 at the end of the season, with 9 losses being the cutoff and 8 wins being your maximum. But Detroit, a lot of people have been giving them a lot of props lately. Even last week, they were saying, oh, this high-scoring offense that has been scoring at will, which I find completely interesting because obviously against my Packers, the offense only put up 17 points. And to say that they've been a crazy high-scoring flying offense, to me, isn't completely accurate. I think if you look at their games, and if you've watched their games, don't get me wrong, they were putting up a lot of points, outside of the Packers game. I think that, against when they played the Titans didn't give up over 100 passing, but it was a special teams failure that game, which essentially, led to Detroit getting a lot of points and also their defense, forcing turnovers. But, it's not like I have hate towards Detroit, but people keep on preaching that it's almost like their offense is completely unstoppable. When clearly last week, the Texans played very, very well on defense, and it wasn't until their offense essentially stalled out and kept on forcing the defense coming back onto the field that, Detroit could come back. And, it's a trend that I've seen, not just with Detroit, but other teams, that if you stall out on offense in the second half, your defense is going to fail. Even if we look at last night's game of Eagles-Commanders, the Commanders looked like, we're not really letting anything up against the Eagles. And Saquon wasn't, running as crazy as you would have wanted, but then they could not score later in the game. And then the runs become easier. The passing becomes easier. Your defense just essentially gets out-fatigued because they can't keep up with these weapons, and eventually it catches up with you, when they were playing sound defense for most of the game. So looking at this, Jacksonville, obviously last week they played the Vikings, who, I could say that, I'll say it, they got lucky in the sense that they were always in that game because Darnold was just messing up so bad. but I don't expect Goff to throw as many picks as he did against the Texans. And I don't expect the Jaguars to get as lucky with Mac Jones against this defense. I mean, the Vikings defense isn't bad, but Mac Jones just did a lot of unforced, errors and interceptions. And I just don't think that they're going to be this lucky. And this is the game that you can really see the Lions probably reignite their offense and make them look as dominant as they were against teams like the Cowboys and other various teams where, yeah, Goff was passing for a ton of yards and they were able to like run at will. But, this is kind of a game that could propel the Lions through the rest of the season when they're having, tougher games against division opponents. But yeah, I'm taking the Lions, obviously, and just my own kind of personal take on the Lions for the past few weeks. Next up, we have Packers-Bears. I put this a little bit higher because while the Bears are obviously in turmoil, and who knows if all the rumors are true, whether some veteran players wanted Caleb benched. Clearly, they wanted the offensive coordinator fired and, a new one brought in. The new one being brought in, it doesn't appear like he is going to be that much of an upgrade, because I'm trying to remember the team that he was offensive coordinator before, but when I listened about it and what's going on in Chicago, it seemed to me like last year he was the offensive coordinator for another team that just didn't really do that much offensively. I might be mistaken, but I just don't like the Bears' chance turning around and playing a Packers team that is getting more healthy this week. And obviously, last week they played the Lions. They played them very strong defensively. 2 weeks ago they played the Lions, played them very strong defensively, like I mentioned, holding them to 17 offensive points to the number one offense in the league. So unless the Bears have some crazy thing up their sleeve, or their new OC does a ton of homework and is like, oh, here's what can beat the Packers, which, there's very few teams that have, I guess, blown out the Packers this year. Obviously, the Eagles scored a lot of points in week 1. Then you have the Vikings that scored a lot of points, in the first half in their matchup. But you look at how many points the Packers have given up, even though they've given up, I think, decent yardage. Like, they haven't kept the yardage to like a lockdown amount. I don't think as the Bears, you're really thinking you're going to win this game, especially having lost the last 10 matchups against the Packers. And like I said, the Packers getting more healthy this week. So I'm taking my Packers, go Pack go. And, we're going to continue our ownership of the Bears. Moving on, we have Falcons-Broncos. As we know with the Broncos, they were one play away from knocking the undefeated Chiefs. A very solid game where at the end they just couldn't score. They couldn't get a field goal essentially, at that last one, but they couldn't get in range also of a field goal that would have, put them, higher than the Chiefs and made the Chiefs, win potentially. And I just like what the Broncos are doing. I think they're, I think Bo Nix is passing the ball well. I think that he's making smart, educated decisions. He looks more like a vet, with his willingness to play smart and conservative when he needs to and take care of the football. The Falcons clearly coming off a game that they probably should have won against the Saints, but they just really shot themselves too much in the foot. And it's like at the end of the game, yeah, you just can't get out of bounds. And it's like, oh, this is how the game ends. And it's, kind of ridiculous. You think with a guy like Cousins and with however many skilled players that these guys have, that they would be able to do what they needed to win the game against a bad Saints team. But the Falcons, I think, kind of showed their true colors. And I think I'm going to take the Broncos in this game. I like the way that they're playing. I like the way they're taking care of the ball. And I think that I think that Atlanta just doesn't do too well against these good defenses, which the Broncos have. And they're a sneaky good defense. So I'm taking the Broncos over the Falcons. Moving on to Seahawks Niners. Now, these two teams obviously don't have a crazy amount of wins, but I am taking this in the sense that I think it's a huge relevant game because obviously the Niners went into Seattle and they schooled the Seahawks the last time. It wasn't even really a competition. Now, we know that these two teams are extremely bitter towards each other and it can go either way. I think with the second matchup being that the Niners schooled the Seahawks before, I do think that the Niners win this game because they have McCaffrey and they didn't have him before. He was clearly kind of on a snap count last week, which I think is healthy for their offense anyway. I think that Ricky Pearsall is emerging as a good target, but then again, with the Niners, I feel like, a lot of these guys don't have to have the crazy skill set, but Shanahan does a good job of getting them open, and Purdy's going to find them. But they have enough weapons on the Niners still without Ayuk that it's like, are the Seahawks going to be able to rally and win this game? I think the Niners win because the Seahawks haven't done a good job of stopping the run. They, I think, are just kind of outclassed with the big brother San Francisco 49ers, who kind of see them as the annoying little brother that can be a little bit scrappy, but there's too many holes. The matchup is too big for McDonald right now because he's a rookie head coach and he needs like a year under his belt to maybe understand what it takes to win a game like this. And while Seattle has plenty of talent, they just haven't been able to really put it all together this year. And it's been very inconsistent, much like last year, which is all right because they are moving to a rookie head coach. So yeah, I'm taking the Niners at home to beat Seattle, but don't be surprised if this game is pretty back and forth because of the bitterness of these two teams. Bengals Chargers. The Bengals, as everyone knows, the headline about them is that, Chase, Burrow, and, their offense is like scoring and putting up mad amount of points. They barely lost to, the Ravens again. And it's pretty nuts to me, like what is going on, on their team. Like, to say that they might not make the playoffs is pretty nuts. And they have to be the most dangerous, 4-6 team I've ever seen. The Chargers, Herbert clearly playing really poised football, controlling the ball, them running it very well. The defense finally playing up to its, talent. And, Harbaugh's is doing a really good job with this team. So looking at this game, I feel like it is more of a toss-up. And I feel like they're going to have a plan for Chase, the Chargers. But I think that Burrow, is very, very gutsy. I think that, this is kind of a must win for them. The Chargers, obviously, it's going to be hard for them to, win the division just because of the way the Chiefs haven't lost a game up until this point and that they're 3 games ahead. And they do play them one more time, but it's kind of, one of those things to me that it's like, can the Chargers make sure that the Bengals don't score a lot? Because I don't see the Chargers scoring. Their offense just isn't meant to be like high scoring. They have a good balance of run, and then they have Herbert kind of dicing it up and being, as precise as he is to control the football, make hard conversions, look a bit easier than they should be. And just overall, him being kind of an annoying quarterback to deal with because he can also run. But looking at this game, I'm going to go with my gut, and I'm actually going to say that I think Cincinnati takes it. I think that they just look like they're on a mission and won't be stopped on offense. And I think that the Chargers aren't going to be able to keep up. And that's my take on this game. Moving on to the second most relevant game this week, in my opinion, is Chiefs Bills. I was kind of up in the air on this one on whether or not it was the most relevant, but these last two games are clearly, not, games you don't want to miss this week in week 11. But Chiefs visit the Bills. The Bills undefeated at home. Obviously, the Chiefs undefeated away. The Chiefs went into Buffalo last year and knocked the Bills out of the playoffs, a game that the Bills could have won and should have won and closed, but they still lost. It's obviously regular season. All the comparison is going to be to, last year's playoff game. Buffalo, is without Kincaid, I saw. And then you also have, Butker getting injured, which I think is, bad for the Chiefs. Kicking has obviously been an issue around the league this year. Like, there's been a lot of missed kicks, especially going last week into this week. I mean, we saw last night, the Jake Elliott missing a number of field goals that were like, how in the hell did he miss this? Not that it necessarily changed the game too much because because obviously the Eagles, they still won and they won convincingly at the end, but like it's crazy, how much you have to bank on a kicker nowadays. But that's the way that playoff football is. You always want a kicker that's going to hit like 90%, or 100%, if he's, elite tier like Tucker. But looking at this game, I'm kind of thinking like, who's going to win this? The Chiefs clearly have won in every single different way this year. And a lot of people are saying they're lucky. But I want to say that they're not lucky in that they have players that are game changer players at so many different levels that they just have a never quit attitude, which is why you can never get complacent. You can't make that one mistake late in the game that is like, oh, we screwed our team against the Chiefs. And with that being said, I actually want to say that I think the Bills win this one. I think they're going to make a statement win. And while this won't put them obviously first in the AFC at all because they'll still have two losses to the Chiefs, one, I just think that with how banged up the Chiefs are, I think that it's going to be just it's going to be, a margin that the Chiefs are going to fall short, knock on wood. But yeah, I'm going with the Bills. And Bills Mafia, I think that they can make that place loud enough to really, maybe make it a little bit hard on Kansas City. And that's kind of going to be the difference is that, the Bills are at home. Moving on to my game of the week. It is Baltimore and Pittsburgh. I personally don't like Russell Wilson. I think that he's been getting he's been overhyped a lot. And it reminds me of when he, not when he was starting for the Broncos, because obviously both those years he sucked and he wasn't good. But when he was on the Seahawks and it was early in the year of when he was playing, I guess it's different in the sense that he wasn't starting at the beginning of this year. But last week when they played, people want to give Russell Wilson props, and it's like the dude was 50% on passing. And to me, it doesn't take a great quarterback to throw to Mike Williams, who's a 6'5" wide receiver who has beat his guy down the sideline, where his guy clearly looked like he looked like he thought he had help over the top, is what I noticed. And he just messed up on his technique. And it's like any wide receiver can do a go route. The fact that he said, oh, we didn't practice this, like, who cares? It's a go route. If you're a wide receiver and you can't do a go route and, catch a ball that is coming in, over the top type of thing, then I'm sorry, but you shouldn't be a wide receiver. The other thing that I think about too against the Commanders is the Commanders messed up on special teams when their special teams is usually pretty good. They are a well-coached team. And, without the flopped, catch on the punt, they don't get another 7 points and they lose that game. And then we're talking about how Russell Wilson, just didn't do enough and was passing at a subpar level. People talk about 50% like it's, the worst of the worst, and it is. Unless your receivers are dropping an astronomical amount of footballs that are catchable, I don't think there's really any pardon, for throwing for 50%. And that wasn't the case last week. Like, I'm sorry, but I've never really been a believer in Russ. And it's like, one of the only reasons I think that they won is that they do have a good amount of, offensive talent with Najee Harris, Freiermuth, Washington, Pickens, and now Mike Williams. That makes it a little bit easier. And even Calvin Austin, I'll throw him in there because he's sneaky and can get deep and do a lot of things. But it's like you've got all this talent and it's like you're a run first offense, and that gives the quarterback the benefit, because if they're not playing to, stop the pass, you're going to get a lot more favorable one-on-one matchups. But that is kind of my spiel of Pittsburgh. Now, don't get me wrong, I like their defense. Their defense is locked down. But with this being, a divisional game, as old, very old, bitter matchup, that like these two teams, met in the past, and it would be 9-6 would be the final score. I don't think it's going to be like that because the offenses are a little bit better, but I think that the Ravens are going to come in here and they are going to beat the Steelers just because you have two guys on the team that Lamar Jackson's playing like an MVP, and then you have Derrick Henry, King Henry playing like an MVP. And I think while the Steelers, they clearly have a very good defense, I think that they're just going to fall short. And because the Ravens have proven they can win by their offense against, defenses this year. I think that they really showed it, against teams like, the Bengals. The Bengals were playing them tough. Another divisional matchup, obviously, last week, but then they were like, we're just going to score at will, at the end of the game. And it's impossible to me to beat the Ravens if you are not scoring the whole game. And I just think that this kind of game could be season defining for both teams. And I think that Jackson and the Ravens are really going to be ready for it. And I think that, I think that Russell Wilson's going to get exposed this game. I think that I don't think he's ready. I do not think he's ready to play a team of this caliber, despite their defense not playing as well as they did last year. I still think that they're very opportunistic. They've made plays when it mattered, and they're still loaded with a lot of talent. So looking at this game, I'm taking Baltimore, and I think that they show who is the top dog in this division by taking first in the division, obviously with a win over Pittsburgh and going to 8-3. Now, if you guys have any thoughts, opinions on any of the upcoming games for week 11, I would love to hear it in the comments. And if you have any other different predictions, then I would also like to hear that and, start a discussion. But if you like NFL content like this, then hit that subscribe button and leave a like. I would greatly appreciate it. And as always, go Pack Go.